Hello there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And today I'm returning to Blockbench for some more low poly work. This time I'm going to be attempting to make my own interpretation of Snake from Metal Gear Solid 1. And I'd like to take it into more of a stylized and simplified version that sits somewhere between the aesthetic of Final Fantasy VII and Mega Man Legends. And luckily I discovered that they've actually made a little Nendoroid figure of Snake, so in preparing for this that became a bit of a nice reference for the sort of chibi deformed proportions that I'd like to try for my model. Alright, well let's get started by hopping into Blockbench and creating a new generic model. I'm going to start with the head first, so I'll add a new mesh, and I'm going to select a cylinder shape because I think this is going to help in creating the face by just having better rounding to the sides there. But I'm going to reduce the number of sides because I want it to look really polygonal. And so I'm feeling like a cylinder with 7 sides is looking pretty good for this. And I can use like the peak on the front as the face, and then the back of it being flat could actually work as the foundation for kind of the mullet hairstyle. Now, this is quite plain still, and I'd like to introduce more vertices that could help me to actually shape this thing. So I'm going to select one of the faces and divide the shape in half with the loop cut tool. We can see it's divided it as a vertical cut, and I'd like that to be going the other way, so I'll change the direction from 0 to 1. And now that cut is running horizontally through the cylinder. I've repeated this action again to make another cut, and now that it's been sliced like this, all those intersections generate accompanying vertices that we can click on and drag around. And so with a little adjusting, I'm establishing a sort of anime style muzzle for the face here. And underneath that, I've brought the middle point forward to create a chin. To create the ears, I'm going to add a new mesh. And again, I'm going to use the cylinder, but this time I've set it to be one with only 5 sides. An alternative for the ears could be that you'd actually extrude them from the head shape itself, meaning you'd chain another face directly off of an original one. But I like the freedom of having this be a separate piece of mesh here. And this is just for fun, so I'm not really concerned with it being the most optimized model ever. Alright, so with that ear in place, we can create a matching one on the other side by first duplicating the original one using either copy-paste or the duplicate option. And then to mirror it to the other side, we go up to transform and then flip it along the x-axis. And you'll see that that just pops into place exactly like how the first one is. Up to this point, I've only been treating this as the bottom part of the head. And this is because Snake wears a headband, so my plan is to introduce another 7-sided cylinder to use for that. And it can just sit as a full layer over top of the existing piece of the head. I've brought a few of the points down just to angle it over the forehead, and I guess it's actually clipping through that a bit to create that look, but with it being the same base shape as the head, it just fits into place well enough, I think. You can probably see where this is going, which is that I'm going to stack what will become the hair on top of the headband layer. So the whole thing is this kind of layer cake assembly, I guess. And what I did for the hair is that I started with this giant sphere. And I wasn't sure if this is actually going to work out, but my thinking was just that it'd provide me with a lot of vertices that I could then drag around into a hairstyle. And it actually turned out to be a decent approach once I found the right ones to pull back and create this sort of spiky, slicked back appearance for it. I did feel like it had too many faces in a few spots though. So to simplify the appearance, I'm going to merge certain vertices together by holding Shift and clicking on those individual points. And then right-clicking and selecting Merge All in Center. And you can see that those 2 points I clicked on now became just a singular point. And in doing so, we're actually also reducing the total number of faces of this object in this fairly controllable way. The last thing for the head then is to create the 2 headband tails off the back. And for this, I've added a plane mesh, which is this sort of paper-thin 2D type of element. So this works really well in approximating a thin piece of fabric like that. I've extruded this one a couple times to give myself a long connected piece to work with, and I've angled it in a few different places just to have this look like it's sweeping through the air. So here's a steady view on how that head is shaping up. Kind of pieced together from all those separate shapes, but I think feeling pretty cohesive when it's all assembled. Alright, let's move on to the body now, and to keep things tidy, I'm going to tuck away all the layers that make up the head into a singular group. And this is actually really handy because it allows us to manipulate that whole thing as if it's one object. Okay, for the body, I'm gonna go a bit classic and just start from a simple cube, or a cuboid, I guess, as it's called here. And I wanna turn this into Snake's vest piece with the shoulder pads and the collar. So just like we did with the head, I'm making a few loop cuts here just to give me some more vertices to work with. Now, I wanted the shoulder pads to be coming out of this at an angle. So I ended up kind of stitching the body together here to set up that position. And it turned out that the body just became this sort of hexagonal cylinder anyway, so that actually seems to be the recurring shape motif to use for this build so far. But either way, that actually set up the angle that I was looking for. So now I can select that face and then click on the extrude button. And that's gonna pop another face out of there that I can then use to shape into the shoulder pads. Once again, I've used the merge function to stitch these vertices together, and that's gonna create a pointed seam running along the middle. And now those are looking nice and prominent. For the collar, I'm gonna use a tube shape, which is like a cylinder, but as you can imagine, it's got a hole carved out of the middle. So this is already quite a perfect shape for this. I'm just gonna select the front series of faces and delete those, and that's gonna create an opening for the collar. But this has actually left an open gap in the new front faces of that shape. So to close that off, we'll select each of those points and right click to create a new face for them. On the lower portion, I've brought in another cube, and this is gonna start out as being a belt around the waist, but then after extruding it a couple times to create some new mesh, this can be shaped into the pelvis right below that. The belt itself needs to have a few ammo packs and pockets and things like that on it, so I've just added some simple cuboid shapes that are pressed right up onto the belt there. And then I've actually angled the two on the front by 45 degrees to approximate them kind of rounding around the body. And it's also giving the whole thing a pretty nice flow now. All right, moving on to the arms and legs here. My approach was basically to just assemble these out of a series of cubes and add a bit of shaping to each component along the way. I wanted this to be built out of separate objects like this rather than it being a continuous object, and this was so that these pieces could be manipulated individually for posing the character. I know there's also a way to insert bones into a model, and perhaps there are other more sophisticated ways of building limbs than what I'm doing here. But this is my first try at making a character in Blockbench, so I was just going about it in a way that I'd know how to pose the final thing after I was done. Now, to make the leg, I actually just copied the entire arm assembly and then kept reshaping it until it looked like a leg and a foot. I figured they basically got the same series of pieces and joints that I'd need for my purposes anyway. So it ended up being a fast way just to get that one sorted out. For now, I'm only going to keep one arm and one leg on the model. This is kind of my own patented version of a T-pose, I guess. But I'll duplicate these later after they're painted, and that way the copy will have the exact same texture mapped onto it already. Before painting this, I'm going to make the entire model larger using the scale function. And I'm doing this because I found that I needed just a bit more surface area for the kind of pixel resolution that I wanted it to have. You are able to select higher resolution pixel textures, but those high res settings for me were causing weird transparent spots on the model. It must have been something about how I modeled this or how I selected the settings, but either way I found that scaling up the model beforehand helped me in my particular situation for having better pixel placement. Now to assign the texture, we'll select the entire model and move over to the Paint tab, and then click on Create Texture. Once again, I'm going to leave this with the default setting and the density set to 16x because I had issues with the 32x setting. And then I'm going to go in and actually change the initial color to a flat gray rather than the default transparent color. And that's just because I think I'll find it easier to start off as already being filled in with a solid tone like that. So we can click Confirm, and we'll see them filled in here with that dark gray now. And then to start adding colors, you can select either a brush or the paint bucket and toggle on the painting grid if you want to see the pixel placement as well. Because a lot of my model is made from separate pieces, I'm going to use the paint bucket, and I've set it to the element setting, which is going to drop a color into the entire piece just in one click. So for my first lap here, it's just going to be a simple pass to get all those flat colors in. Just whatever color is going to be the most dominant tone for that particular part of the body. After getting those assigned, I zoom in to do the detail work using the pixel brush. And for something like the face, I can do this a lot more efficiently by enabling the mirror painting function and setting this to be active along the x-axis. And you can see it kind of quickly flashes that grid to show you what direction it's going to be mirroring the painting. So with that one turned on, it's nice that you can just have to paint certain details only once. And right now I'm getting these cartoony eyes put in, and I just poked under the headband here to get these worked out, since I think they should kind of be sized to that portion of the face without the headband, and then we can put the headband back after and cover them up a little bit. I continued using the mirror painting on the hair and some other parts, but I started noticing that it doesn't always correlate one-to-one. And I think it comes down to the symmetry of your model, including the way that it wrapped the pixels onto certain parts that may be identical otherwise. So there were a few times where I'd painted on pieces that I thought were exactly the same, but I wasn't actually seeing this reflected on the other side as far as what I was painting in. I'm just going to assume that I'm partially to blame for this, either for not understanding the feature, or that maybe my modeling wasn't as exact and symmetrical as I thought it was. So I wish you better luck than I had if you're using mirror painting, but I'm glad that it worked for the eyes at least, and I sort of continued on without it after here. The colors that I'm using here come from a palette called Andesca 32, or EDG 32 it's sometimes called, which is included as one of the default palettes in Blockbench. When I'm making pixel art, I tend to oscillate between either selecting my own colors versus using a preset palette. And with the modeling here, I get so focused on the build of it and everything that when it comes to texturing, I just kind of want to actually quickly pull some colors to experiment with. So it's been really useful to have such a nice and versatile set of colors like this ready to go within the program. After doing an initial round of detailing, I started tweaking some of the colors though a little bit, just to push things into a tad more vibrancy. And I also started experimenting with this purple color as a highlight tone. I was inspired by those really stylized Metal Gear Solid concept art pieces. So I tried using this one kind of like a rim light or something that's just this colorized highlight on that one side. And that started looking really cool as a way to give this some more style that's actually just baked into the model texture itself. The other rendering touch here was that I played with a total of 3 skin tones. So there's the original base color, there's a pink shade tone for that, and then there's this sort of orangey middle tone that provides a transition between those two. I found that this look, this sort of manual or intentional anti-aliasing stuff, these transition colors, this really suits this format. So there's a couple spots with that approach throughout the texturing. Now that the model's all painted up, the last thing we need to do is duplicate out those limbs from earlier. So I've got all the pieces of the arm in a folder, and I'm just going to right-click that group and duplicate it. And then just like before, we'll go up to transform and flip this over the x-axis. And we'll see that new arm pop into place exactly on that other side. And all that texture artwork has also been correctly mirrored as well. And actually, since this is using the same texture assignment, any further edits you do to the painting is actually going to update both arms simultaneously. So this is, I guess, either really handy or could be a drawback if you did want the arms to be different after this. But for me, it worked out quite well. And yes, I have been kind of hiding the full model because I did want to do a dramatic reveal for the final thing. So let's actually go ahead now and take a look at everything put together and finalized. Here we go. All right, so as you can see, I've done some late additions here, being the extra hair shapes on the back to really properly accentuate the mullet. And then he's got some classic accessories also. And those are just some really simple and blocky assemblies. One of my favorite things here about this styling though is how simple it is, just something like rotating one of those rectangles by 45 degrees. And then that's kind of telling you that it's distinguishing itself as being a rounded silencer on the blocky SOCOM, even though they're both very blocky shapes. Like I hinted at before, the posing here is accomplished by the fact that each limb is organized into its own group, and I've set the pivot point according to how that piece should behave. So you're able to click on each of the folders or a shape within the folder and access that pivot point to move the model around in different poses. The other thing I wanted to share is that you're able to export those rotating GIFs of the character model. And these actually have a pixelization setting, which is a sliding scale here. And that'll render the model with this lower resolution kind of appearance to it, where a value of 1 is the default look that has no effect, and a max value of 8 is a pretty extreme appearance. I found that a value of 3 was kind of the sweet spot for mine. It's just got enough detail to clearly see the model features and the texture art, but with that believable level of low resolution to land it in the charm of a PlayStation or an N64 kind of look, I suppose. And we'll close out with some CRT time to take a look at a few more poses and close-ups, including some of that wireframe appearance that I found works quite well as a sort of VR missions kind of look substitute, I guess. So thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.